Hello friends, I welcome you to this edition of Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups. Tonight, I will be reading for you two seasonal stories by Lucy Maud Montgomery. If you enjoy these readings, I would encourage you to subscribe to get notified when a new bedtime story is ready for you. It is time to unwind. Find a place where you can relax. Once you have settled into that place, make yourself comfortable. Take a deep breath. Your day has come to an end. All that is left is for you to listen to the stories and fall into rejuvenating sleep. And so, let us begin these stories. Aunt Cyrilla's Christmas Basket. When Lucy Rose met Aunt Cyrilla coming downstairs, somewhat flushed and breathless from her ascent to the garret, with a big, flat-covered basket hanging over her plump arm, she gave a little sigh of despair. Lucy Rose had done her brave best for some years. In fact, ever since she had put up her hair and lengthened her skirts, to break Aunt Cyrilla of the habit of carrying that basket with her every time she went to Pembroke. But Aunt Cyrilla still insisted on taking it, and only laughed at what she called Lucy Rose's finicky notions. Lucy Rose had a horrible, haunting idea that it was extremely provincial for her aunt always to take the big basket, packed full of country good things, whenever she went to visit Edward and Geraldine. Geraldine was so stylish, one might think it queer. And then Aunt Cyrilla always would carry it on her arm and give cookies and apples and molasses taffy out of it to every child she encountered, and just as often as not to older folks too. Lucy Rose, when she went to town with Aunt Cyrilla, felt chagrined over this. All of which goes to prove that Lucy was as yet very young, and had a great deal to learn in this world. That troublesome worry over what Geraldine would think nerved her to make a protest in this instance. "Now, Aunt Cyrilla," she pleaded, "you're surely not going to take that funny old basket to Pembroke this time, Christmas Day and all." "'Deed and deed I am," returned Aunt Cyrilla briskly, as she put it on the table and proceeded to dust it out. "I never went to see Edward and Geraldine since they were married, that I didn't take a basket of good things along with me for them, and I am not going to stop now. As for its being Christmas, all the more reason. Edward is always real glad to get some of the old farmhouse goodies. He says they beat city cooking all hollow, and so they do." "But it's so countrified," moaned Lucy Rose. "Well, I am countrified," said Aunt Cyrilla firmly, "and so are you. And what's more, I don't see that it's anything to be ashamed of. You've got some real silly pride about you, Lucy Rose. You'll grow out of it in time, but just now it is giving you a lot of trouble." "The basket is a lot of trouble," said Lucy Rose crossly. "You're always mislaying it or afraid you will, and it does look so funny to be walking through the streets with that big, bulgy basket hanging on your arm." "I am not a mite worried about its looks," returned Aunt Cyrilla calmly. "As for its being a trouble, why, maybe it is, but I have that, and other people have the pleasure of it. Edward and Geraldine don't need it. I know that, but there may be those that will. and if it hurts your feelings to walk alongside of a countrified old lady with a countrified basket, why, you can just fall behind, as it were." Aunt Cyrilla nodded and smiled good-humoredly, and Lucy Rose, though she privately held to her own opinion, had to smile too. "Now let me see," said Aunt Cyrilla reflectively, tapping the snowy kitchen table with the point of a plump, dimpled forefinger. "What shall I take? That big fruitcake for one thing. Edward does like my fruitcake. And that cold boiled tongue for another. Those 3 mince pies too. They'd spoil before we got back, or your uncle'd make himself sick eating them. Mince pie is his besetting sin. And that little stone bottle full of cream. Geraldine may carry any amount of style, but I've yet to see her look down on a real good country cream, Lucy Rose. And another bottle of my raspberry vinegar. That plate of jelly cookies and donuts will please the children, and fill up the chinks. And you can bring me that box of ice cream candy out of the pantry, and that bag of striped candy sticks your uncle brought home from the corner last night. The apples, of course, 3 or 4 dozen of those good eaters. And a little pot of my greengage preserve. Edward will like that. And some sandwiches and pound cake for a snack for ourselves. Now, I guess that will do for edibles. The presents for the children can go in on top. There's a doll for Daisy, and a little boat your uncle made for Ray. And a tattered lace handkerchief apiece for the twins. And the crocheted hood for the baby. Now, is that all? There's a cold roast chicken in the pantry, said Lucy Rose wickedly. And the pig Uncle Leo killed is hanging up in the porch. Could you put them in too? Aunt Cyrilla smiled broadly. Well, I guess we'll leave the pig alone. But since you have reminded me of that, the chicken may as well go in. I can make room. Lucy Rose, in spite of her prejudices, helped with the packing and, not having been trained under Aunt Cyrilla's eye for nothing, did it very well too, with much clever economy of space. But when Aunt Cyrilla had put in as a finishing touch a big bouquet of pink and white everlastings, and tied the bulging covers down with a firm hand, Lucy Rose stood over the basket and whispered vindictively, "Some day I'm going to burn this basket, when I get courage enough. Then there'll be an end of lugging it everywhere we go like an old market woman." Uncle Leopold came in just then, shaking his head dubiously. He was not going to spend Christmas with Edward and Geraldine, and perhaps the protest of having to cook and eat his Christmas dinner all alone made him pessimistic. "I mistrust you folks won't get to Pembroke tomorrow," he said sagely. "It's going to storm." Aunt Cyrilla did not worry over this. She believed matters of this kind were foreordained, and she slept calmly. But Lucy Rose got up 3 times in the night to see if it were storming, and when she did sleep, had horrible nightmares of struggling through blinding snowstorms, dragging Aunt Cyrilla's Christmas basket along with her. It was not snowing in the early morning, and Uncle Leopold drove Aunt Cyrilla and Lucy Rose and the basket to the station, 4 miles off. When they reached there, the air was thick with flying flakes. The station master sold them their tickets with a grim face. "If there's any more snow comes, the trains might as well keep Christmas too," he said. "There's been so much snow already that traffic's blocked half the time, and now there ain't no place to shovel the snow off onto." Aunt Cyrilla said that if the train were to get to Pembroke in time for Christmas, it would get there, and she opened her basket and gave the station master and 3 small boys an apple apiece. "That's the beginning," groaned Lucy Rose to herself. When the train came along, Aunt Cyrilla established herself in one seat and her basket in another, and looked beamingly around her at her fellow travelers. These were few in numbers. A delicate little woman at the end of the car, with a baby and 4 other children, a young girl across the aisle with a pale, pretty face, a sunburnt lad 3 seats ahead in a khaki uniform, a very handsome, imposing old lady in a sealskin coat ahead of him, and a thin young man with spectacles opposite. A minister, reflected Aunt Cyrilla, beginning to classify, who takes better care of other folks' souls than of his own body. And that woman in the sealskin is discontented and cross at something. Got up too early to catch the train, maybe. And that young chap must be one of the boys not long out of the hospital. That woman's children look as if they hadn't enjoyed a square meal since they were born. And if that girl across from me has a mother, I'd like to know what the woman means, letting her daughter go from home in this weather in clothes like that. Lucy Rose merely wondered uncomfortably what the others thought of Aunt Cyrilla's basket. They expected to reach Pembroke that night. But as the day wore on, the storm grew worse. Twice the train had to stop while the train hands dug it out. The 3rd time it could not go on. It was dusk when the conductor came through the train, replying brusquely to the questions of the anxious passengers. A nice lookout for Christmas. No, impossible to go on or back. Track blocked for miles. What's that, madam? No station near. Woods for miles. We're here for the night. These storms of late have played the mischief with everything. Oh dear, groaned Lucy Rose. Aunt Cyrilla looked at her basket complacently. At any rate, we won't starve, she said. The pale, pretty girl seemed indifferent. The sealskin lady looked crosser than ever. The cocky boy said, "Just my luck," and 2 of the children began to cry. Aunt Cyrilla took some apples and striped candy sticks from her basket and carried them to them. She lifted the oldest into her ample lap, and soon had them all around her, laughing and contented. The rest of the travelers straggled over to the corner and drifted into conversation. The cocky boy said it was hard lines not to get home for Christmas after all. I was invalided from South Africa 3 months ago, and I've been in the hospital at Nutley ever since. Reached Halifax 3 days ago and telegraphed the old folks I'd eat my Christmas dinner with them, and to have an extra big turkey, because I didn't have any last year. They'd be badly disappointed. He looked disappointed too. One khaki sleeve hung empty by his side. Aunt Cyrilla passed him an apple. We were all going down to Grandpa's for Christmas, said the little mother's oldest boy dolefully. We've never been there before, and it's just too bad. He looked as if he wanted to cry, but thought better of it and bit off a mouthful of candy. Will there be any Santa Claus on the train? Demanded his small sister tearfully. Jack says there won't. I guess he'll find out, said Aunt Cyrilla reassuringly. The pale, pretty girl came up and took the baby from the tired mother. What a dear little fellow, she said softly. Are you going home for Christmas too? Asked Aunt Cyrilla. The girl shook her head. I haven't any home. I'm just a shop girl out of work at present, and I'm going to Pembroke to look for some. Aunt Cyrilla went to her basket and took out her box of green candy. I guess we might as well enjoy ourselves. Let's eat it all up and have a good time. Maybe we'll get down to Pembroke in the morning. The little group grew cheerful as they nibbled, and even the pale girl brightened up. The little mother told Aunt Cyrilla her story aside. She had been long estranged from her family, who had disapproved of her marriage. Her husband had died the previous summer, leaving her in poor circumstances. Father wrote to me last week and asked me to let bygones be bygones and come home for Christmas. I was so glad. And the children's hearts were set on it. It seems too bad that we are not to get there. I have to be back at work the morning after Christmas. The cocky boy came up again and shared the candy. He told amusing stories of campaigning in South Africa. The minister came too and listened, and even the sealskin lady turned her head over her shoulder. By and by the children fell asleep, one on Aunt Cyrilla's lap, and one on Lucy Rose's, and two on the seat. Aunt Cyrilla and the pale girl helped the mother make up beds for them. The minister gave his overcoat, and the sealskin lady came forward with a shawl. "This will do for the baby," she said. "We must get up some Santa Claus for these youngsters," said the cocky boy. "Let's hang the stockings on the wall and fill 'em up as best we can. I've nothing about me but some hard cash and a jackknife. I'll give each of 'em a quarter, and the boy can have the knife." "I've nothing but money either," said the sealskin lady regretfully. Aunt Cyrilla glanced at the little mother. She had fallen asleep with her head against the seat back. "I've got a basket over there," said Aunt Cyrilla firmly, "and I've some presents in it that I was taking to my nephew's children. I'm going to give 'em to these. As for the money, I think the mother is the one for it to go to. She's been telling me her story, and a pitiful one it is. Let's make up a little purse among us for a Christmas present." The idea met with favor. The cocky boy passed his cap, and everybody contributed. The sealskin lady put in a crumpled note. When Aunt Cyrilla straightened it out, she saw that it was for $20. Meanwhile, Lucy Rose had brought the basket. She smiled at Aunt Cyrilla as she lugged it down the aisle, and Aunt Cyrilla smiled back. Lucy Rose had never touched that basket of her own accord before. Ray's boat went to Jackie, and Daisy's doll to his oldest sister. The twins' lace handkerchiefs to the two smaller girls, and the hood to the baby. Then the stockings were filled up with donuts and jelly cookies, and the money was put in an envelope and pinned to the little mother's jacket. "That baby is such a dear little fellow," said the sealskin lady gently. "He looks something like my little son. He died 18 Christmases ago." Aunt Cyrilla put a hand over the lady's kid glove. "So did mine," she said. Then the two women smiled tenderly at each other. Afterwards they rested from their labors, and all had what Aunt Cyrilla called a snack of sandwiches and pound cake. The cocky boy said he hadn't tasted anything half so good since he left home. "They didn't give us pound cake in South Africa," he said. When morning came, the storm was still raging. The children wakened and went wild with delight over the stockings. The little mother found her envelope and tried to utter thanks and broke down. And nobody knew what to say or do, when the conductor fortunately came in and made a diversion by telling them they might as well resign themselves to spending Christmas on the train. "This is serious," said the cocky boy. "When you consider that we've no provisions, don't mind for myself, used to have rations or no rations at all, but these kiddies will have tremendous appetites." Then Aunt Cyrilla rose to the occasion. "I've got some emergency rations here," she announced. "There's plenty for all, and we'll have our Christmas dinner, although a cold one. Breakfast first thing. There's a sandwich apiece left, and we must fill up on what is left of the cookies and donuts, and save the rest for a real good spread at dinner time. The only thing is, I haven't any bread." "I've a box of soda crackers," said the little mother eagerly. Nobody in that car will ever forget that Christmas. To begin with, after breakfast they had a concert. The cocky boy gave 2 recitations, sang 3 songs, and gave a whistle solo. Lucy Rose gave 3 recitations, and the minister a comic reading. The pale shop girl sang 2 songs. It was agreed that the cocky boy's whistle solo was the best number, and Aunt Cyrilla gave him the bouquet of everlastings as a reward of merit. Then the conductor came in with the cheerful news that the storm was almost over, and he thought the track would be cleared in a few hours. "If we can get to the next station, we'll be all right," he said. "The branch joins the main line there, and the tracks will be clear." At noon they had dinner. The train hands were invited in to share it. The minister carved the chicken with the brakeman's jackknife, and the cocky boy cut up the tongue and the mince pies, while the sealskin lady mixed the raspberry vinegar with its due portion of water. Bits of paper served as plates. The train furnished a couple of glasses. A tin pint cup was discovered and given to the children, and Aunt Cyrilla and Lucy Rose and the sealskin lady drank, turn about, from the latter's graduated medicine glass. The shop girl and the little mother shared one of the empty bottles, and the cocky boy, the minister, and the trainman drank out of the other bottle. Everybody declared they had never enjoyed a meal more in their lives. Certainly it was a merry one, and Aunt Cyrilla's cooking was never more appreciated. Indeed, the bones of the chicken and the pot of preserve were all that was left. They could not eat the preserve because they had no spoons, so Aunt Cyrilla gave them to the little mother. When all was over, a hearty vote of thanks was passed to Aunt Cyrilla and her basket. The sealskin lady wanted to know how she made her pound cake, and the cocky boy asked for her recipe for jelly cookies. And when 2 hours later the conductor came in and said the snowplows had got along and they'd soon be starting, they all wondered if it could really be less than 24 hours since they met. "I feel as if I'd been campaigning with you all my life," said the cocky boy. At the next station they all parted. The little mother and the children had to take the next train back home. The minister stayed there, and the cocky boy and the sealskin lady changed trains. The sealskin lady shook Aunt Cyrilla's hand. She no longer looked discontented or cross. "This has been the pleasantest Christmas I've ever spent," she said heartily. "I shall never forget that wonderful basket of yours. The little shop girl is going home with me. I've promised her a place in my husband's store." When Aunt Cyrilla and Lucy Rose reached Pembroke, there was nobody to meet them, because everybody had given up on expecting them. It was not far from the station to Edward's house, and Aunt Cyrilla elected to walk. "I'll carry the basket," said Lucy Rose. Aunt Cyrilla relinquished it with a smile. Lucy Rose smiled too. "It's a blessed old basket," said the latter, "and I love it. Please forget all the silly things I ever said about it, Aunt Cyrilla." The Christmas Surprise at Enderly Road. "Phil, I'm getting fearfully hungry. When are we going to strike civilization?" The speaker was my chum, Frank Ward. We were home from our academy for the Christmas holidays and had been amusing ourselves on this sunshiny December afternoon by a tramp through the back lands, as the barrens that swept away south behind the village were called. They were grown over with shrub maple and spruce, and were quite pathless, save for meandering sheep tracks that crossed and recrossed, but led apparently nowhere. Frank and I did not know exactly where we were, but the backlands were not so extensive, but that we would come out somewhere if we kept on. It was getting late, and we wished to go home. "I have an idea that we ought to strike civilization somewhere up the Enderly road pretty soon," I answered. "Do you call that civilization?" said Frank with a laugh. No Blackburn Hill boy was ever known to miss an opportunity of flinging a slur at Enderly road, even if no Enderly roader were by to feel the sting. Enderly Road was a miserable little settlement straggling back from Blackburn Hill. It was a forsaken-looking place, and the people, as a rule, were poor and shiftless. Between Blackburn Hill and Enderly Road, very little social intercourse existed, and as the road people resented what they called the pride of Blackburn Hill, there was a good deal of bad feeling between the two districts. Presently, Frank and I came out on the Enderly road. We sat on the fence a few minutes to rest and discuss our route home. "If we go by the road, it's 3 miles, said Frank. "Isn't there a shortcut?" "There ought to be one by the wood lane that comes out by Jacob Hart's," I answered, "but I don't know where to strike it." "Here is someone coming now. We'll inquire," said Frank, looking up the curve of the hard-frozen road. The someone was a little girl of about 10 years old, who was trotting along with a basketful of school books on her arm. She was a pale, pinched little thing, and her jacket and red hood seemed very old and thin. "Hello, Missy," I said, as she came up, and then I stopped, for I saw she had been crying. "What is the matter?" asked Frank, who was much more at ease with children than I was, and had always a warm spot in his heart for their small troubles. "Has your teacher kept you in for being naughty?" The mite dashed her little red knuckles across her eyes and answered indignantly, "No, indeed. I stayed after school with Minnie Lawler to sweep the floor." "And did you and Minnie quarrel? And is that why you are crying?" asked Frank solemnly. "Minnie and I never quarrel. I'm crying because we can't have the school decorated on Monday for the examination after all. The Dickies have gone back on us, after promising to." And the tears began to swell up in the blue eyes again. "Very bad behavior on the part of the Dickies," commented Frank. "But can't you decorate the school without them?" "Why, of course not. They are the only big boys in the school. They said they would cut the bows and bring the ladder tomorrow and help us nail the wreaths up. And now they won't. And everything is spoiled, and Miss Davis will be so disappointed." By dint of questioning, Frank soon found out the whole story. The semi-annual public examination was to be held on Monday afternoon, the day before Christmas. Miss Davis had been drilling her little flock for the occasion, and a program of recitations, speeches, and dialogues had been prepared. Our small informant, whose name was Maggie Bates, together with Minnie Lawler and several other little girls, had conceived the idea that it would be a fine thing to decorate the schoolroom with greens. For this it was necessary to ask the help of the boys. Boys were scarce at Enderly School, but the Dickies, 3 in number, had promised to see that the thing was done. "And now they won't," sobbed Maggie. "Matt Dickey is mad at Miss Davis, 'cause she stood him on the floor today for not learning his lesson. And he says he won't do a thing, nor let any of the other boys help us. Matt just makes all the boys do as he says. I feel dreadful bad, and so does Minnie." "Well, I wouldn't cry any more about it," said Frank consolingly. "Crying won't do any good, you know. Can you tell us where to find the wood lane that cuts across to Blackburn Hill?" Maggie could, and gave us minute directions. So, having thanked her, we left her to pursue her disconsolate way and betook ourselves homeward. "I would like to spoil Matt Dickey's little game," said Frank. "He's evidently trying to run things at Enderly Road School and revenge himself on the teacher. Let us put a spoke in his wheel and do Maggie a good turn as well." "Agreed, but how?" Frank had a plan ready to hand, and when we reached home, we took his sisters, Carrie and Mabel, into our confidence. And the 4 of us worked to such good purpose all the next day, which was Saturday, that by night everything was in readiness. At dusk, Frank and I set out for the Enderly Road, carrying a basket, a small stepladder, an unlit lantern, a hammer, and a box of tacks. It was dark when we reached the Enderly Road schoolhouse. Fortunately, it was quite out of sight of any inhabited spot, being surrounded by woods. Hence, mysterious lights in it at strange hours would not be likely to attract attention. The door was locked, but we easily got in by the window, lighted our lantern, and went to work. The schoolroom was small, and the old-fashioned furniture bore marks of hard usage, but everything was very snug, and the carefully swept floor and dusted desk bore testimony to the neatness of our small friend Maggie and her chum Minnie. Our basket was full of mottos made from letters cut out of cardboard and covered with lissom sprays of fur. They were, moreover, adorned with gorgeous pink and red tissue roses, which Carrie and Mabel had contributed. We had considerable trouble in getting them tacked up properly, but when we had succeeded and had furthermore surmounted doors, windows, and backboard with wreaths of green, the little Enderly Road schoolroom was quite transformed. "It looks nice," said Frank in a tone of satisfaction. "Hope Maggie will like it." We swept up the litter we had made, and then scrambled out of the window. "I'd like to see Matt Dickey's face when he comes Monday morning," I laughed, as we struck into the back lands. "I'd like to see that midget of a Maggie's," said Frank. "See here, Phil, let's attend the examination. Monday afternoon. I'd like to see our decorations in daylight." We decided to do so, and also thought of something else. Snow fell all day Sunday, so that on Monday morning sleighs had to be brought out. Frank and I drove down to the store and invested a considerable share of our spare cash in a varied assortment of knickknacks. After dinner, we drove through to the Enderly Road schoolhouse, tied our horse in a quiet spot, and went in. Our arrival created quite a sensation, for, as a rule, Blackburn Hillites did not patronize Enderly Road functions. Miss Davis, the pale, tired-looking little teacher, was evidently pleased, and we were given seats of honor next to the minister on the platform. Our decorations really looked very well, and were further enhanced by 2 large red geraniums in full bloom, which, it appeared, Maggie had brought from home to adorn the teacher's desk. The side benches were lined with Enderly Road parents, and all the pupils were in their best attire, Our friend Maggie was there, of course, and she smiled and nodded towards the wreaths when she caught our eyes. The examination was a decided success, and the program which followed was very creditable indeed. Maggie and Minnie, in particular, covered themselves with glory, both in class and on the platform. At its close, while the minister was making his speech, Frank slipped out. When the minister sat down, the door opened and Santa Claus himself, with big fur coat, ruddy mask, and long white beard, strode into the room with a huge basket on his arm. Amid a chorus of surprised "Ohs" from old and young. Wonderful things came out of that basket. There was some little present for every child there. Tops, knives, and whistles for the boys. Dolls and ribbons for the girls. And a prize box of candy for everybody. All of which Santa Claus presented with appropriate remarks. It was an exciting time, and it would have been hard to decide which were the most pleased. Parents, pupils, or teacher. In the confusion, Santa Claus discreetly disappeared, and school was dismissed. Frank, having tucked his toggery away in the sleigh, was waiting for us outside, and we were promptly pounced upon by Maggie and Minnie, whose long braids were already adorned with the pink silk ribbons which had been their gifts. "You decorated the school," cried Maggie excitedly. "I know you did. I told Minnie it was you the minute I saw it." "You are dreaming, child," said Frank. "Oh, no, I'm not," retorted Maggie shrewdly. "And wasn't Mad Dickie mad this morning? Oh, it was such fun. I think you are two real nice boys, and so does Minnie. Don't you, Minnie?" Minnie nodded gravely. Evidently, Maggie did the talking in their partnership. "This has been a splendid examination," said Maggie, drawing a long breath. "Real Christmassy, you know. We never had such a good time before." "Well, it has paid, don't you think?" asked Frank as we drove home. "Rather," I answered. It did pay in other ways than the mere pleasure of it. There was always a better feeling between the rollers and the hillites thereafter. The big brothers of the little girls, to whom our Christmas surprise had been such a treat, thought it worthwhile to bury the hatchet, and quarrels between the two villages became a thing of the past.